You can't cheat the mountain. Jeremiah Johnson wasn't just a rugged frontier adventure. It was a bruising experiment in realism that pushed its cast and crew into genuine danger, isolation, and psychological strain. Shot almost entirely on unforgiving mountain terrain, the production blurred the line between performance and survival. Actors froze for real, animals behaved unpredictably, and the film's quiet spiritual tone emerged from chaos rather than planning. Fact number 20. The film was originally much louder. Early versions of Jeremiah Johnson barely resembled the film audiences eventually saw. Initial drafts leaned heavily into traditional Western conventions, complete with sharper dialogue, clearer villains, and more frequent gunplay. The Mountain Man story was meant to feel muscular and assertive. Once filming began, the environment itself undermined that approach. Vast landscapes swallowed dialogue. Long treks drained energy from the performers. Director Sidney Pollack began stripping away scripted moments that felt artificial against the silence of the mountains. In the editing room, entire scenes were removed simply because they felt dishonest. Executives worried the film was becoming too quiet, too slow, too introspective. Pollack held his ground. The restraint became the point. The silence was not empty. It was the story. Fact number 19. Robert Redford lived like the character. Rather than separating himself from the hardship of production, Robert Redford leaned directly into it. He deliberately distanced himself from the crew, avoided socializing, and rejected comforts that were available to him as the film's star. Redford wanted exhaustion to show without being performed. As shooting progressed, his isolation deepened. Crew members recalled him wandering alone into the mountains between takes, sometimes returning visibly shaken or silent. His weight loss, weathered appearance, and hollowed expression were not carefully designed by makeup artists. They were the cumulative effect of cold, altitude, hunger, and solitude. By the final reels, Redford looked genuinely altered. The transformation audiences see is not symbolic. It is documentation. Fact number 18. Winter was not simulated. The brutal winter sequences were not crafted with studio tricks or artificial snow machines. The production committed fully to real mountain conditions, waiting for storms instead of creating them. Temperatures dropped far below what modern film sets would allow. Cameras malfunctioned. Film stock became brittle. Crew members worked through numb hands and shallow breathing caused by altitude. Several suffered minor frostbite. Delays were not an option. Losing the weather meant losing the film's realism. Every breath visible on screen is real. Every trembling hand belongs to someone genuinely cold. There was no warming tent just off camera for dramatic moments. Today, safety regulations would shut such a production down instantly. In 1972, the suffering was simply part of the job. Fact number 17. The bear scene nearly went wrong. The bear encounter is one of the film's most memorable moments, but it was also one of its most dangerous. Although the animal was trained, its behavior remained unpredictable under stress. The noise of cameras and crew agitated it repeatedly, throwing off blocking and timing. Handlers stood just out of frame, armed with rifles as a last resort. Robert Redford was positioned closer to the bear than recommended, even by the looser safety standards of the era. There was little room for error. Each additional take increased the risk of something going catastrophically wrong. The scene was captured quickly and with visible tension because that tension was real. The fear on screen is not acting, it is proximity. Fact number 16. The film rejected easy heroism. Jeremiah Johnson deliberately refuses the myth of the triumphant Western hero. The character does not conquer the frontier or bend it to his will. He adapts or he dies. Losses are not balanced with speeches or musical cues that signal victory. The film avoids emotional instruction, leaving viewers to sit with discomfort and ambiguity. This was a direct rejection of romanticized frontier storytelling. Survival is shown as endurance rather than dominance. When violence occurs, it brings consequences that linger rather than resolution. Early audiences struggled with this approach, mistaking restraint for weakness. Over time, the film's quiet honesty has become its defining strength. The mountain is not beaten, it simply remains. Fact number 15. The film was shot almost entirely out of order. Production realities forced Jeremiah Johnson to be filmed in fragments rather than chronologically. Weather windows closed without warning. Locations became inaccessible overnight. Scenes meant to depict early optimism were sometimes shot after weeks of exhaustion. This dislocation had an unintended benefit. Robert Redford's physical decline and emotional withdrawal felt organic because the fatigue was genuine. Continuity errors were less important than truth. Editor John Bloom later noted that the film's internal rhythm emerged in post-production rather than on set. The structure mirrors memory more than narrative logic. Moments blur together. Time feels elastic. This fragmented assembly reinforced the story's emotional arc. Jeremiah does not experience life as chapters. He experiences it as survival punctuated by loss. Fact number 14. Will Geer was not acting. The Mountain Man Bearclaw feels like a relic from another century because the performance is grounded in lived experience. Will Geer had spent decades advocating for environmental conservation and rural self-reliance. His mannerisms were not learned for the role. They were habits. Geer improvised many of his lines, including philosophical observations about nature and balance. Pollack allowed scenes to run long simply to capture Geer's cadence. The relationship between Bearclaw and Jeremiah became the film's moral backbone. When Bearclaw exits the story, the absence is deliberate and devastating. It signals that wisdom is fragile and temporary. Once it disappears, the mountain offers no guidance. Fact number 13. The violence was intentionally anti-spectacle. Unlike most westerns of its era, Jeremiah Johnson refuses to choreograph violence for excitement. Gunfire is sudden. Death is awkward. There is no musical emphasis to guide emotion. Director Sidney Pollack wanted every act of violence to feel like a rupture rather than a release. Characters do not celebrate survival. They endure it. Even revenge is portrayed as hollow and corrosive. The famous final stare between Jeremiah and the Crow Warrior contains no triumph, only recognition. This approach confused audiences expecting catharsis. Yet it is precisely this restraint that gives the film its haunting power. Violence is not a solution. It is a scar. Fact number 12. The script was constantly being rewritten on location. The screenplay evolved daily. Snowstorms erased planned scenes. Animal behavior changed blocking. Actors struggled with altitude and cold. Rather than fight these disruptions, the filmmakers adapted. Writer John Milius embraced the chaos, allowing the environment to dictate narrative shifts. Dialogue was trimmed or discarded when breathless delivery felt false. Entire character arcs were simplified. The result is a story that feels discovered rather than constructed. The Mountain becomes a co-author. This improvisational process frustrated studio overseers but preserved authenticity. The film does not feel scripted because much of it was not. It was shaped by circumstance, moment to moment. Fact number 11. The ending refused closure on purpose. The final moments of Jeremiah Johnson offer no resolution in the traditional sense. There is no victory, no return to civilization, no moral speech. Jeremiah's silent acknowledgement of his enemy is not forgiveness or surrender. It is understanding. Pollack insisted on ending the film here despite pressure to soften it. Studio executives wanted reassurance that suffering had meaning. The filmmakers refused. The ending suggests coexistence rather than conquest. Survival requires respect, not dominance. This ambiguity frustrated some viewers but secured the film's legacy. The story does not conclude. It stops. Like life in the mountains, there is no ending, only continuation. Fact number 10. The film nearly failed with test audiences. Early test screenings produced confusion rather than applause. Viewers accustomed to clear heroes and narrative payoffs struggled with the film's quiet brutality. Many complained that nothing seemed to happen, even though so much suffering filled the screen. Studio executives briefly considered recutting the film with more narration and a stronger musical presence. Director Sidney Pollack resisted these changes fiercely. He believed the discomfort was the point. The film was not meant to entertain easily. It was meant to linger. If you are enjoying these behind-the-scenes truths, go ahead and like and subscribe because the remaining facts reveal how this film quietly reshaped the Western forever. The final cut remained restrained. Time proved Pollack right. Fact number 9. Native American characters were treated differently. Unlike many Westerns of its era, Jeremiah Johnson avoids depicting Native American characters as faceless antagonists. The Crow are shown as disciplined, intelligent, and bound by codes of honor. Their motivations are clear even when brutal. The massacre that defines the film's final act is not framed as heroism. It is a violation with consequences. This perspective was unusual for mainstream cinema in 1972. Pollock consulted historical accounts to ensure cultural behavior felt authentic rather than theatrical. The result is moral complexity rather than simplification. Jeremiah's conflict is not with savagery, it is with his own ignorance. The film refuses to offer moral shortcuts. Violence born from misunderstanding is still violence. Fact number 8. The film's pacing was a direct risk. Long stretches pass without dialogue or action. Characters walk, weather changes, silence dominates. This pacing was a gamble at a time when Westerns were expected to deliver momentum. Pollock believed that boredom and patience were essential to the experience. Life in the wilderness is repetitive. Survival is monotonous until it is suddenly lethal. The film mirrors that rhythm intentionally. Scenes linger beyond comfort. Audiences are forced to feel time pass. This choice alienated some viewers, but deeply affected others. Modern critics now cite the pacing as revolutionary. It demands attention rather than excitement. The film does not chase its audience. It waits for them. Fact number 7. Many supporting actors were not professionals. Several minor roles were filled by real outdoorsmen rather than trained actors. Their physical ease around weapons, animals, and terrain grounded the film in reality. Dialogue delivery was often stiff, but Pollock embraced this. Polished performances would have felt artificial against the environment. These men moved and behaved as people who belonged in the wilderness. Their authenticity helped anchor Redford's performance. When Jeremiah feels like an outsider early in the film, it is because he genuinely is. The world around him does not perform. It exists. This casting decision sacrificed theatricality for truth. The trade-off paid off on screen. Fact number 6. The landscape was treated as a character. The mountains are not a backdrop. They are an active force shaping behavior, emotion, and fate. Pollock framed landscapes to dwarf human figures, emphasizing vulnerability rather than conquest. Wide shots linger not for beauty, but for scale. The land does not care who survives. It remains indifferent. This approach redefined how Western landscapes could function narratively. Nature is not something to be mastered. It is something to be endured. Jeremiah's evolution is measured not by victories, but by how he moves within the land. By the end, he does not dominate the mountains. He belongs to them conditionally. Fact number 5. The film quietly redefined the Western. Without announcing itself as a revolution, Jeremiah Johnson dismantled the traditional Western from the inside. There are no towns to civilize, no villains to eradicate, no final ride toward progress. The film replaces conquest with consequence. Survival replaces victory. This shift influenced a generation of filmmakers who saw that the genre could be introspective rather than myth-making. Later, revisionist Westerns borrowed this emotional restraint and moral ambiguity. At the time, audiences did not label it groundbreaking. It simply felt strange. Decades later, its influence is unmistakable. The Western did not die. It evolved. And this film marked one of the quiet turning points. Fact number 4. Jeremiah is not meant to be imitated. Many viewers mistake Jeremiah as an aspirational figure. The film actively resists that reading. His isolation is not freedom, it is cost. His skills come from necessity, not mastery. Each step towards self-sufficiency strips away connection. The film offers no fantasy of escape into nature without consequence. Jeremiah survives, but he loses language, intimacy, and certainty. His final state is not enlightenment, it is acceptance. This distinction is crucial. The film does not romanticize withdrawal from society. It documents what that withdrawal takes. The mountain grants survival only in exchange for everything else. Fact number 3. Silence became the film's most powerful tool. Dialogue is sparse by design. When characters speak, it matters. Long stretches of silence allow environment and expression to carry meaning. This choice forces viewers to observe rather than be instructed. Emotions emerge slowly. Grief arrives without announcement. The absence of constant explanation builds trust between film and audience. Silence becomes a language. It communicates exhaustion, fear, and resignation more honestly than words could. This approach was risky in an era driven by exposition. It remains one of the film's most enduring qualities. Silence is not emptiness here. It is weight. Fact number 2. The film ages better than its era. Many Westerns from the early 1970s are trapped by their politics or aesthetics. Jeremiah Johnson remains timeless because it avoids topical commentary. Its concerns are elemental: weather, hunger, fear, isolation, consequence. These do not age. The film does not preach, it observes. Modern audiences accustomed to slower prestige cinema often find it more accessible now than viewers did at release. What once felt alien now feels honest. The film did not chase relevance, it waited for it. Fact number 1. The final look says everything. The last exchange between Jeremiah and the Crow Warrior contains no dialogue, no explanation, no closure. Two survivors acknowledge one another across a shared understanding of loss. The moment is not reconciliation, it is recognition. Violence has not resolved anything, it has merely clarified reality. The film ends here because nothing more can be said. This look crystallizes the entire thesis of the film: survival without illusion, respect without sentimentality. The mountain remains, Jeremiah remains, and the story stops without pretending it has ended. Bonus fact: the mountain changed everyone who worked there. Long after filming ended, cast and crew spoke less about the movie and more about what the experience did to them. The people returned quieter, more withdrawn, less impressed by comfort. Several crew members refused similar location shoots afterward, saying the mountain had stripped something away they could not name. Jeremiah Johnson was not remembered as a difficult production in the usual sense. It was remembered as a test. The isolation lingered. The silence followed people home. The film captured something that cannot be faked because it was lived. That is why it endures, not because it tells a story about survival, because it was made by people who briefly had to survive it.